Okay, we're going to go ahead and start this lesson, and I'm going to try to get through it fairly quickly. It's kind of a long lesson, but I will be reading to you today. And this thing that you see on the screen actually is from your work text page, which your work text page is going to be page 41. And we're going to actually work on that together. We're going to do it very quick-like, okay? All right, so let's go ahead and look in. You can go ahead and open your work text to page 41 and just kind of set that aside. And let's look in our book on page 92. Now, let's kind of review from what we've been learning. So, who thought the wealthy should use their wealth to help others? Remember his name? Andrew Carnegie. What did the United States government do when some big businesses misused their power? Remember, they passed some laws that tried to stop these businesses from acting like they were, from acting so unjustly. But in what ways were workers better off than Americans who lived in earlier times? Remember, we talked about some ways they were better off and some ways they were not. In the ways that they were better off, they did make more money. They lived in better places. The products that they bought were better made, and they had a better opportunity to buy nicer things. What about labor unions? What did they do? They helped unite the workers to help them get better things from their employers. All right, let's look at page 92. At the top it says cities. Now we're going to be talking about the growth of the city. In the years after the Civil War, American cities grew. More people moved to the cities of the United States. Fewer people moved to the rural regions of the country. Even in the West, towns sprang up alongside the railroads. Mining towns, oil towns, and meatpacking towns grew. Existing cities such as New York and Chicago grew larger. Many of the new city dwellers were rural Americans looking for work in the cities. Not as many workers were needed on American farms. New machines could reap and harvest the fields. Workers in the city found jobs that paid them more money. They also worked fewer hours. City businesses needed people who could sell items in stores. These businesses needed workers to wait on customers in restaurants. They needed people to work in offices. The cities needed construction workers to build the new buildings. Maintenance workers were needed to help keep the buildings in good repair. Black Americans moved from the South to American cities elsewhere. These Americans were trying to escape rural discrimination and sharecropping. Racial discrimination is treating people unjustly because of the color of their skin. Immigrants also came to American cities. By the 1880s and 1890s, many people in the cities were immigrants. Over half the people living in America's largest cities came from other countries. Most of the immigrants who came were from the Southern and Eastern Europe. Many Americans thought the immigrants looked different. They also lived differently than other Americans. The immigrants worshiped differently. Most Americans were Protestant Christians, but most of the immigrants were Jewish, Roman Catholic, or Eastern Orthodox. Some Christians saw the coming of these immigrants as a great missions opportunity. They printed tracts and Bibles in the immigrants' languages. Christians also tried to help immigrants as they arrived in the United States. In early America, people who lived in cities could walk anywhere in the city. The cities were small. People worked near where they lived. They might even work and live in the same building. If employers lived near their workers, both saw how each other lived. Employers could know whether their workers were good people or not. As the cities grew, people could no longer walk everywhere. They needed new ways to move around a city. At first, people used buses and streetcars that were pulled by horses, but horses were messy and smelly. Electric-powered streetcars replaced them in the 1880s. Some cities like New York and Chicago used trains to move people around the city. Some tracks were built above the streets. Boston, New York, and Philadelphia built trains that ran underground. An underground railroad is a subway. Electric-powered streetcars and trains changed how people lived and worked in cities. Businesses stayed in the center of the city. Around this center were factories. Apartments for poor people were built near the factories. These people could not afford to use streetcars or trains to travel to work. The poor needed to live near where they worked. Farther out from the center of the city lived the middle-class people. The wealthier lived on the edges of the city. They could afford to travel farther on trains and streetcars each day to work in the city. Their homes were built in quieter neighborhoods. They liked to live away from all the noise of the city. Growing cities spread out as more buildings were built. Cities also grew up. Taller buildings were built. In the past, thick stone walls were needed to support the weight of a tall building. The tallest buildings in a city could not rise more than 12 stories. But now, steel could be used to support and build skyscrapers. Skyscrapers could rise over 30 stories into the air. Office buildings in the center of cities such as New York and Chicago rose high into the sky. People needed to find a way to get to the top of these tall buildings. To walk up 30 flights of stairs would have been a lot of hard work. The invention of the elevator solved this problem. The elevator was a practical way to move for people who lived and worked in tall buildings. With an elevator, people could get to the highest floor quickly and without tiring themselves out. Now, the growth of cities also led to challenges. More people meant more crime. More buildings meant more fires. More roads needed to be built and more sewers created. Immigrants who were unfamiliar with life in America needed help. Often this help came from city machines. Machine was the name given to a group of people who controlled the way a city ran. The city machine would help people in various ways, but it helped people for bad reasons. Leaders of a city machine wanted people to vote for their machine's candidates in the next election. The machine wanted power in government so that the machine's members could make money. They did dishonest things if people gave them money. Sometimes city leaders who were part of the machine ignored the fact that gambling was taking place in the city, or a construction company might give money to machine leaders. The leaders would then give government construction projects to that company. The bosses of the machines were not the kind of virtuous leaders America's founders had wanted to run the nation. These machine leaders were not just, and they did not rule in the fear of God. You see that political cartoon up there in the top corner? It looks like a big fat man, and then his head, look what his head's made out of. It's a money bag. Let's look at the wording right underneath that. The Brains is what that's called, by Thomas Nast. It's a political cartoon of Boss Tweed, a leader who was part of the machine that stole millions of dollars from New York City. Turn back over to page 92, where we were talking about the growth of a city. The immigrants were coming in. What did the businesses in the cities need people to do? They needed them to do all the work that needed to be done. And so they were getting people from all walks of life coming in. They were getting immigrants coming in from Southern and Eastern Europe. The Black Americans were moving into the city from the South. How did some Christians view this coming of these immigrants? Because a lot of people didn't like these immigrants coming in. But what did the Christians think about it? It gave them a chance for missions work, didn't it? Can you look at page 94? On page 94, we were talking about the city itself growing so much to where the people couldn't walk around the city anymore, and they weren't using horses much. They were using electric cars, street cars, and they even built a subway to go underground. Some of them put their railroads on top of their city. So they were having, the cities were getting so large now that you had to get around the city. So on page 95, it was talking about how the city was not only growing out, but it was growing up because of the steel that was being made. They could now make skyscrapers. So they were going up. So what did they have to invent to help people get from one place to another in those tall skyscrapers? The elevator. Can you imagine going way up every single day and then all the way back down different times of the day when there wouldn't be an elevator? Maybe it would be a lot more thin. What do you think? All right, and then we were talking about on page 95, where we were talking about the cities. There was 3 different areas where people lived. The poorer people lived right close to the center of town, where near the factories and where the stores were, because they couldn't afford to drive or to ride in the streetcars and the different things. So they had to live close to where they worked. And then you go out a little ways and you had your middle class. They lived out what would be called the suburban area. The urban area would be in the center of town. And then in the rural outlying areas around the city is where the more wealthy people lived. So can you look on your work text page on page 41, and you're going to find it's a Venn diagram, which we've done one of these before. There's a blue box or a blue circle and a green circle and a red circle. Now in the blue circle, at the top it says urban. The green says suburban, and the red says rural, okay? So what I want you to do on these is I want you to write down things that were true only for the urban areas. We're going to write right in this area, okay? Things that are only true for suburban areas, we'd write in this area. And things that are only true for the rural areas, we would write here. So if there's anything that would be the same for rural and urban, we would write here. But it's not true for suburban, so you're going to put it here. If it's true for all 3, you would put it here. If it's true for just these 2, you would write it here. And if it's only true for these 2, you would write it here. See how that works? All right, so under urban, something you might put is that it was a city. It was a big city. You could just write city. You could also write subways. Let's do this. Let me give you a list of words right here, and then we'll just see if you can put them in the right sections. Okay? So the first one we're going to do, I've already told you where to put city. Oh, this doesn't want me to write now. City. Then we have subways. I want you to write these words and phrases in the sections where they would belong, okay? Now, it's not a graded page, but I am going to check it. I want to make sure you put these where they belong, okay? If you can't remember, look back in your book on those pages that we just read, okay? All right. So these are some words and phrases that I would like for you to use right over here. So you're going to just have to pause this, and you're going to have to read these and write them on your page in the little sections where they go. Okay, and I know they're right like in these little sections, it's kind of hard to write if you have a lot to write. So you can write small or just however you want to do it. So, but I would like to see a picture of this when you're done and make sure that you understood this. Now, if you have any questions or you don't understand, make sure you send me a message on Google Classroom, okay? All right, that's all for today.